I think his favorite color is purple. I'm Michael Smerconish in Philadelphia. Happy Passover. Happy Easter, everyone. I just bought my second Tesla. I was drawn by sleek design, concern for the environment, and a respect for the company's founder. Until recently, I haven't thought of Elon Musk in political terms. Instead, I've admired him for his innovation and critical thinking. But like everything else around us, he just became the subject of our partisan divide. In a TED Talk this week, he suggested his bid for Twitter is all about free speech.
Is someone you don't like allowed to say something you don't like? And if that is the case, then we have free speech. And it's damn annoying when someone you don't like says something you don't like. That is a sign of a healthy, functioning, free speech situation.
His interest in acquiring Twitter now being heralded on the right and greeted with trepidation on the left. On Fox News, he was portrayed as a burr in the saddle of Silicon Valley progressives.
To the far left, Musk's desire to see the platform embrace freedom of speech and expression, that's a growing threat to their censorship agenda, their efforts to censor conservatives.
Let's have someone in charge who actually respects the First Amendment and free speech, so I think it's great.
So censorship and propaganda are at the very heart of neoliberalism. And Elon Musk is challenging all of that directly.
But there was this tweet from Max Boot of the Washington Post who said, quote, "I am frightened by the impact on society and politics if Elon Musk acquires Twitter. He seems to believe that on social media, anything goes. For democracy to survive, we need more content moderation, not less." And I'll bet these competing narratives of Musk become self-fulfilling. In other words, when partisans hear that their polarized outlets are welcoming Musk's initiative or resistant to it, they're going to fall in line like bots. But I think it's a mistake to cast Musk in red or blue colors. What do we know about his politics? We know that in 2011, this is how he described his political ideology to The Atlantic.
I'm sort of moderate, sort of half Republican, half Democrat, if you will. But I'm somewhere in the middle. I guess I'm sort of socially liberal and fiscally conservative, which I think a lot of the country is.
Then in July of 2018, he tweeted that he's, quote, "not a conservative and registered independent, politically moderate. Doesn't mean I'm moderate about all issues. Humanitarian issues are extremely important to me." Shortly before the 2016 election, Musk told CNBC this about then candidate Donald Trump.
I feel a bit stronger that probably he's not the right guy. He just doesn't seem. It doesn't seem to have the sort of character that reflects well on the United States.
In June of 2017, he quit two of President Trump's business advisory councils after Trump pulled the U.S. out of the Paris Climate Agreement. A year later, he proclaimed in a tweet, "I'm actually a socialist. Just not the kind that shifts resources from the most productive to the least productive, pretending to do good while actually causing harm. True socialism seeks greatest good for all." He's also not a guy donating only to Democrats or to Republicans. Since 2002, he's given a total of more than $1 million to politicians, parties, and PACs on both sides of the aisle. Among the Democratic recipients of Elon Musk's contributions, $1,000 to Debbie Wasserman Schultz in 2010, $2,500 to Barack Obama in 2011, $5,300 to Rahm Emanuel in 2013, $2,300 to Hillary Clinton in 2016, $5,000 to Gavin Newsom in 2018. For the Republicans, he donated $2,000 to George W. Bush in 2002, $2,500 to Marco Rubio in 2011, $5,200 to Lindsey Graham in 2013, $2,600 to Kevin McCarthy in 2014, $2,800 to Joni Ernst in 2020. His total donations to Democrats and Republicans are almost exactly even. Here's what he said last September to Kara Swisher, who'll join me in just a moment.
What do you think is going to bring our country together, if at all? Moving to Mars, what?
Well, I think if there was some moderate, sort of centrist president, then I think that would help. that I think everyone just wants. I think most people want a president who is just a very competent, executive. Not too far left, not too far right, and everyone would be like. I think most people would prefer that.
Look, the guy is complex in a good way. Sorry to tell those of you on the fringes, either left or right, but Elon Musk is not your guy. He's somewhere in the middle, as is the rest of the country. And how can anyone object to the way that he handled a potential Saudi impediment to his bid to take over Twitter? Saudi Prince Al-Wahid bin Talal Al Saud is a billionaire who's also one of Twitter's largest shareholders. When Musk announced his $41 billion all-cash bid for the company, the prince tweeted this: "I don't believe that the proposed offer by Elon Musk, $54.20 a share, comes close to the intrinsic value of Twitter given its growth prospects. Being one of the largest and longest-term shareholders of Twitter, the kingdom and I reject this offer." Musk's reply? Interesting. Just two questions, if I may. How much of Twitter does the kingdom own, directly and indirectly? And what are the kingdom's views of journalistic freedom of speech? Well, we know the kingdom's disregard for free speech. U.S. intel believes Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman personally approved of the murder of Washington Post journalist Jamal Khashoggi. My color choices for my 2022 Tesla Model Y, they were pearl white, midnight silver, deep blue, solid black, and red. I say it's time for Tesla to add the founder's color, which is clearly purple. I want to know what you think. Go to my website at smerconish.com and vote on this week's survey question: do you want Elon Musk to take over Twitter? Joining me now is Kara Swisher, host of the New York Times podcast Sway. She's interviewed Musk several times, recently wrote this column in the Times: Elon Musk knows exactly what he's doing. Kara, what exactly is he doing?
He's buying Twitter, and that's what he wants to do, and that's what he's doing. I mean, I know people think it's a pump and dump scheme, some of them, but he has plenty of money. It's not really where he would dabble if he was trying to make more money. He can go for cryptocurrency to do that on any Tuesday. But he's a big fan of Twitter, and he thinks it's going the wrong direction. He's correct in that it's been mismanaged for a long time, that its stock has been exactly where it was during the IPO, and that he has some better ideas. I think the free speech stuff gets pulled by the right and left in a way that's not what this is about, even though he does believe that. He likes to say outrageous things, and he likes just to say them, and sometimes he's tweaking people. Sometimes he's unnecessarily cruel. Sometimes he's just having fun. I know it sounds crazy, but blowing off steam, and I don't like a lot of it, but I like some of it. And so I think he's buying Twitter. That's what he's doing.
You have noted that he has himself used Twitter previously as a performance site. I was thinking of those words when I saw the exact dollar value of his bid. You know what I'm talking about.
Yeah. I think we can speak of it. He always makes a weed reference. When he was saying he was going to take Tesla private, he said it was for $420 a share, which is it's called weed o'clock, I guess. I don't know. I have no idea, but it's a weed joke, and he likes to do that. So it was $54.20. He often does things like that around a lot of things, not just, he loves memes. He likes all kinds of memes. And so he tends to be very playful. And then again, sometimes he says things on Twitter that are just obnoxious and almost like a 11-year-old boy who hasn't been raised particularly well. But that's his manner. And then other times he says things that he puts up pictures of the rockets that he's building or the cars or some really amazing advanced technology. And so as you said, he's a complex figure.
Kara, I would argue that Donald Trump, to be successful coming back in 2024, needs access to social media, whether that's Twitter or something else, but probably Twitter. Does Elon Musk, if he's successful, necessarily need Trump and Trump supporters for Twitter to be viable in the way he'd like?
I think he'd put them back on. He objected when Jack Dorsey, who he's friends with, took them off. Yeah, I think he said it right after that happened. He said he just didn't think it was a good idea. A lot of people don't think it's a good idea, but Twitter did, and it's a public company, but it's a private company. It's a capitalist company, and it can do what it wants. I think that they would have come under this pressure, Elon Musk or no. It would be very hard for Twitter to keep that permanent ban if he was, one, running for president, and two, became president. It would be very hard. He believes in temporary suspensions or timeouts. He calls them timeouts. And, you know, I don't agree with him on this, but I think Donald Trump violated the rules of Twitter many times, but the rules of Twitter can be changed by anyone at any time because, again, it's a private company.
In terms of where this ends, William Cohan, writing for Puck, I'll put it up on the screen and read this aloud. Is there a better bidder out there for Twitter than Elon Musk's $43 billion all-cash offer? That's the immediate question that Goldman will need to answer as it begins to get its mind around the Musk offer. The stock market is saying no. If the market, in its collective wisdom, thought there was a legitimately higher offer out there to compete with Musk, then the Twitter stock would be trading above $54.20 a share in expectation of that higher offer. Bottom line is he says the price is fair and there's probably no higher bidder. Your reaction?
Yeah, I think I wrote it was a low ball, but not that low ball because there's no other bidders right now. That doesn't mean there's not going to be. A lot of people would like to own this. I'm sure Facebook would like to own this, but can't because it's under scrutiny. You know, it would be a big deal if they tried to buy it. I suspect Google would probably be interested in it. Salesforce tried to buy it at one point, and I'm sure there's a lot of private equity people that think they can do a lot with this audience. The problem for Twitter is it's a very small business and not a very good one right now, and it's actually a very small site. And so that's compared to Facebook, especially. And so that's the issue is it's not very economic what Elon is doing here unless he can make it a better executed management company. Now, he has that track record, so perhaps he can, although it's in hardware, it's in rockets and cars. But who knows? He's proven himself to be a very good executive for sure. So I don't know. There are bidders who would want it, but maybe aren't able to buy it. Because of all the hooks around it, including Elon Musk owning 10% of it. So, as you wrote most recently for the Times, never boring to follow this guy. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you, Michael. What are your thoughts? Tweet me at Smerconish. Go to my Facebook page. I will read some social media reactions during the course of the program. This, I think, comes from YouTube. Content moderation is another phrase for censorship. Timothy Howell says content moderation is censorship. Others say, but when you cross a line and take on a demeanor of danger, then something's got to be done about it. But I think that Kara Swisher, who knows the subject matter far better than I and is close to this and has interviewed Musk several times, is probably right when she says that Musk would probably bring him back. But see, then I think people look at this as a referendum on Trump, when in fact Musk's record was pretty clear, as I laid out at the outset, to say that he's not a guy that he's lockstep with. Anyway, I want to know what you think. Go to my website at smerconish.com. Answer this week's survey question. Do you want Elon Musk to take over Twitter? Register for the newsletter while you're there. Up ahead, a lot of American veterans are now feeling the urge to get on a plane and help Ukraine fight Russia. Should they? I'll talk to an Iraq veteran who did so, training-wise, and is just back with some unique insights. Plus, at 88, California Democrat Dianne Feinstein, the oldest sitting U.S. senator, this week her hometown newspaper ran a story citing anonymous colleagues' concerns about her mental acuity. I'll talk to one of the reporters who broke that story.
are you or anyone you know an American veteran with an impulse to hop on a plane to Ukraine and join the fight against Russia? Listen to the advice of my next guest. He's been there. Matt Gallagher is a veteran of the Iraq War, just got back from Lviv. And since returning, he and his fellow trainers have been deluged by messages from other veterans asking if they should go. As he wrote in the New York Times, quote, should these men and women go to Ukraine? It depends. Matt Gallagher joins me now. He's a former U.S. Army captain. He has published several novels and nonfiction works, including the war memoir Kaboom, Embracing the Suck in a Savage Little War. So, Matt, why did you, on your own dime, go over there and try and train Ukrainian citizens?
Thanks for having me, Michael. Along with two friends and fellow combat veterans, Adrian Bonenberger and Benjamin Bush, at the end of February, we flew over to Lviv, Ukraine. We saw a sovereign democracy under attack. Through Adrian, we knew from the Lviv City Council that there was a need for military veterans to come over and train the civilian defense force. We had no clue at that point how the war was going to go. You know, the Russian invasion towards central Ukraine and Kyiv was ongoing. So we just decided to go. We figured there was a need. We had these skills, and it was on us just to show up and go do the thing.
So you get home, word's out that you've just been there. Veterans now want to know, should I go over there and fight? What's the answer?
Like with so much of life, it all depends, right? All three of us have heard from all kinds of military veterans wanting to get involved, maybe joining the Foreign Legion, being trainers like we were, working in humanitarian relief capacity. And it really comes down to one thing. Do you know you can help the Ukrainian people on the ground? Do you have a particular skill set, right? Like a former Special Forces medic who has a month between jobs and wants to go over and treat wounded refugees and train other civilians on combat medicine. Absolutely, there's a need for someone like that. I certainly am not going to stand in his or her way. Somebody maybe who is wistful for military life or how they remember military life being, giving them a sense of purpose, have some kind of vague notions of wanting to participate in history, figure they'll just show up and Ukrainians will help find them a place. No, sorry. I get all that, but that's romantic and foggy. And the last thing on a practical level, what the Ukrainian people and Ukrainian government needs more of, because there's plenty of those types already milling about.
Matt, what's the attitude of the U.S. government about people who go over and join the fight against Russia? Because it occurs to me, if someone were to do that and be captured by Russian forces, that's quite a prize. That individual could be a whole pawn in what's going on a global level.
That's absolutely correct. It'd be a huge propaganda coup for the Kremlin to get any American, especially an American veteran, right? And it wouldn't matter what kind of capacity they were actually working in to become that kind of propaganda tool. That said, the United States government, the State Department in particular, has been very direct and clear with its language that all Americans should get away from Ukraine, stay out of Ukraine, find other ways to help. That said, they haven't really imposed any legal barriers. They haven't enforced any legal mechanisms available to them. Just speaking from my own firsthand experience, when we flew back from Ukraine in the third week of March, they saw the Ukraine stamps in my passport and asked if I was carrying any weapons. I was not, and that was it. Then I was back on my way home. So it's kind of a hands-off approach is what I've seen.
How hard would it be for an American veteran to go over there to actually find the fight?
More difficult now than it would have been a month ago, right? Buy a plane ticket to Krakow, easy enough. Get a bus or a taxi to Lviv in Western Ukraine. Not too difficult for anybody who's done any sort of traveling before. Then getting on a train to Kyiv, again, not so difficult for anybody with some kind of travel experience. From there, pushing east towards the Donbas area where the war has moved, probably pretty difficult, right? The Ukrainian Foreign Legion has temporarily shut down recruitment. The Georgian National Legion, which is another paramilitary outfit that's been fighting in Ukraine and using foreign volunteers, they've stepped up their screening to make sure no pretenders and posers can get in their ranks. So it's, a month ago when the fighting was happening in the suburbs around Kyiv, probably would have been much easier. Now the Ukrainian government is starting to understand all the international pressures and the public relations and information warfare issues involved with foreign fighters. So there's more barriers now. You have to be who you say you are to be able to actually get into the fight.
Matt, it's a fascinating subject. I'm conjuring up a vision in my head of what that foreign legion looks like. I'm picturing like the Dirty Dozen from the old movie. Thank you so much for being here. I appreciate your contribution.
Thanks for having me, Michael.
More social media reaction, Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, et al. What do we have from Twitter? And no to volunteers. Russia will use that as an excuse to escalate. They will say those individuals are not volunteering and that they are undercover from NATO. Stop pushing nuclear war. You know, it's interesting. There's a front page story that I was just reading talking about propaganda in the Times today about how there's a psychiatric hospital outside of Kyiv. I think it said 40, 50 miles away, where Russian soldiers, they show up with weapons, bring the patients out into a courtyard and force them to thank Vladimir Putin on camera. So I think that the observation of how this could be used for propaganda purposes is valid. Up ahead, does former President Trump's endorsement in a Republican primary influence those voters? It'll be put to the test in Pennsylvania, where he anointed Dr. Mehmet Oz, and now in Ohio, where J.D. Vance just got the Trump seal of approval. Plus, what to make of this San Francisco Chronicle headline, colleagues worry Dianne Feinstein now mentally unfit to serve, citing recent interactions. I'll talk to one of the reporters who wrote the piece. And please make sure that you're going to my website at smerconish.com and answering this week's survey question. Do you want Elon Musk to take over Twitter? So how best to handle the sensitive issue of Senator Dianne Feinstein? This week, the San Francisco Chronicle ran a story suggesting the 88-year-old Democrat may be, quote, mentally unfit to serve. The unnamed sources it cites include 4 U.S. senators, 3 of them Democrats, a California Democratic member of Congress, and 3 former Feinstein staffers. The California lawmaker recounted the experience, quote, rather than delve into policy, Feinstein repeated the same small-talk questions like asking the lawmaker what mattered to voters in their district, with no apparent recognition the two had already had a similar conversation. Those interviewed for the article also say it appears that Feinstein can no longer fulfill her duties without relying on her staff. Currently, Feinstein is the Senate's oldest member, but there are 6 others also in their 80s. In response to concerns about her acuity, Feinstein had this to say: I remain committed to do what I said I would when I was reelected in 2018, fight for Californians. The real question is whether I'm still an effective representative for 40 million Californians, and the record shows that I am. During a Thursday interview with the Chronicle's editorial board, in which Feinstein was described as, quote, diminished but lucid and responsive, the senator added that she doesn't plan to step down before the end of her term, which runs through 2024. I meet regularly with leaders. I'm not isolated. I see people. My attendance is good. I put in the hours. We represent a huge state, and so I'm rather puzzled by all of this. The assessment of Feinstein prompted the Chronicle to issue an editorial calling on Democrats to speak openly about her mental fitness, calling on her to resign if she's unfit for service. We invited Senator Feinstein on today's program, would welcome her at any time. With me now to discuss all this is Tal Kopin, Washington correspondent for the Chronicle, who co-wrote the original story. Tal, I'm going to put on the screen a paragraph from the piece which says this: 4 U.S. senators, including 3 Democrats, as well as 3 former Feinstein staffers and the California Democratic member of Congress, told the Chronicle in recent interviews that her memory is rapidly deteriorating. They said it appears she can no longer fulfill her job duties without her staff doing much of the work required to represent nearly 40 million people of California. Have any of those sources spoken to Senator Feinstein and shared the concerns that they have?
Well, I don't want to get into exactly, who has had what conversations and how they relate to my sources, but I will tell you that my reporting indicated that there are conversations happening among her colleagues and those close to her about what to be done about this, and that in the past, if there have been efforts to sort of broach the subject with her or intermediaries, it's been brushed away. And, every single one of the conversations I had for this piece was painful. Every person I spoke with had a deep respect and reverence for her and her trailblazing career, which no one can deny. The woman has had an incredible path-breaking career, and some of the concern actually comes from that place. They don't want to see her career be remembered in this way. They want to see her be able to have a dignified exit and be remembered for all that trailblazing. But part of what made her such a trailblazer, especially as a woman politician, making breaking those ceilings along the way, was that she had to ignore naysayers who told her, she couldn't live up to expectations or anything like that. And so some of that tendency, some of that stubbornness that made her such a tremendous politician is still there, and makes it all the more difficult for those conversations to happen with her about her own political future.
Right. I mean, I hear all that, and I think it's a painful subject to discuss as well. I'm drawn to it because we all go through this in life. And I think it's incumbent upon the people closest to her to have this conversation. Let me ask this. Is it possible that this is born of sexism? Is it possible that this is born of ambition by people around? Is it possible that this is born of ideology, that some people are gunning for her because she's too progressive or not progressive enough? Are any of those factors at play here?
Well, let me answer it in part this way. I will say that, the Chronicle does not take anonymous sourcing lightly, and we go through an internal process to decide whether we want to grant someone anonymity. The factors we weigh are how credible we believe them to be, how important we believe the information to be, and the reasons for anonymity. And in that process, we are absolutely confident in the credibility and the motivations of our sources. If there's any suggestion that perhaps any of my sources were motivated by political ambition. We had those conversations, and we are very confident in what we published and stand behind it. In terms of your question about sexism and ambition, I absolutely understand the criticism and noted it in my piece that there have been plenty of male politicians in history who have been in the Senate past their prime, and no one, called them out to a public degree. And whether any of that can play into this conversation that's happening, I think is absolutely fair game for others to discuss if they would like to. It's part of the conversation. At the same time, at the end of the day, I have an obligation to California's, nearly 40 million people to make sure that they are fully informed about their elected officials, and those elected officials are held accountable. And we felt that the information that was being relayed to us and the very specific details that we were being told were absolutely too important to ignore and needed to be reported.
Tal, one other question. So you write the piece, you co-authored this piece, and then she presents herself in some fashion to the editorial board, and the editorial board of your newspaper then write about it. Catherine, this is the final graph. And in the editorial, they say this: but if Feinstein's mental fitness has indeed deteriorated to the point where it's an open secret that she's incapable of doing her job, Democrats need to forego the jokes and say so openly. You know who your sources are. You've had these conversations. Do you think they will now speak openly?
I think it's ultimately going to be up to them. I have followed the after effects of my piece, and I know that it has been a conversation starter, and we'll see where the conversation goes. I've seen so many emails and tweets and just outreach from readers who have felt, relation to this piece in terms of experiences they've had in their own life and difficult conversations that they've had to have with family members, perhaps, or those close to them. I think it struck a nerve for a lot of people, and we'll see whether, those who believe this strongly, as they told me they do, that this is not a position that she should continue to be in, whether they try to do something about it. The conversation will have to go on from here.
Tal Kopan, thank you so much. I appreciate your time.
Thank you for having me.
Checking in on social media reaction, what do we have from the world of Twitter? How about a mandatory retirement age, say 70 years old? Most enterprises use one. Yeah, I mean, Paul, age is such a relative thing. 70 on one person is not 70 on another. I can tell you, I would say that if you're going to have a mandatory age, I don't think it would be 70. I think it would be north of 70, but I understand the point. It's painful to talk about. It is, but it's important. It's important. I want to remind you to answer the survey question this week at smerconish.com. Do you want Elon Musk to take over Twitter? When you're there, would you register for the daily newsletter? Balance delivered daily. Still to come, when former President Trump endorsed Dr. Mehmet Oz in Pennsylvania's GOP Senate primary, MAGA world went nuts. And then yesterday, Friday, in another swing state, Ohio, Trump endorsed former Trump antagonist J.D. Vance. Could his choices have real impact on these swing state elections? As Democrats and Republicans battle for control of the U.S. Senate this fall, how impactful is a primary endorsement among Republicans from former President Donald Trump? On May 3rd, in the swing state of Ohio, Republicans will choose among 7 candidates to replace retiring GOP Senator Rob Portman. On Friday, President Trump announced his preference, J.D. Vance, the author of the book Hillbilly Elegy and a former Trump antagonist. Despite the fact that, as Politico reported, more than 36 county GOP chair and state party Central Committee members banded together to sign a letter urging Trump not to endorse Vance, noting that he, quote, referred to your supporters as racists and proudly voted for Evan McMullin in 2016. This comes on the heels of a Trump endorsement in my home state of Pennsylvania, where Republican Pat Toomey is retiring. Trump endorsed Mehmet Oz for the primary here, which takes place on May 17. His statement read in part, Oz has lived with us through the screen and has always been popular, respected, and smart. He even said that I was in extraordinary health, which made me like him more, although he also said that I should lose a couple of pounds. After Trump's original pick, Sean Parnell, dropped out of the race, Dr. Oz and hedge fund CEO Dave McCormick had been competing for Trump's endorsement. Both candidates traveled to Mar-a-Lago to kiss the ring. McCormick had been thought to have the inside track because he's married to former Trump Deputy National Security Advisor Dina Powell, and his campaign includes several Trump veterans, including Hope Hicks. Joining me now to discuss is Selena Zito, a columnist for the New York Post and national political reporter for the Washington Examiner, where she wrote this piece, What the Hell Was He Thinking? Pennsylvania conservatives react to Trump's support of Oz. Actually, Selena, here's more of what you wrote. It was a decision that left many dedicated Trump supporters perplexed. Why did he choose someone who had not resonated with conservatives in such a key state on the Senate map? Who whispered in his ear that this was a good idea? Selena, he's like a moth to a flame, you know? He loves controversy, and the more you tell him not to do something, I'm convinced the odds are higher. That's exactly what he'll do.
You're exactly right. And that is part of both of his appeal and part of why other people didn't like him in 2016 and 2020. So there's a lot to unpack with this endorsement and why Pennsylvania conservatives across the state, I mean, not all of them, but a lot of them were really upset about this choice. They actually thought that Trump was going to sit this one out. And his decision to endorse Oz, who hasn't really stuck with the primary voters. If people don't know this, in Pennsylvania, it's a closed primary, so Republicans have to register Republicans vote for Republican candidates and registered Democrats vote for Democrats.
In Ohio yesterday, he endorsed J.D. Vance. Here's something J.D. Vance said in the past about Donald Trump.
I'm a never Trump guy. I never liked him, and I've noticed this willingness from people who think a lot like I do that, look, we told you so. To all these white working class voters, we told you so. We told you that Trump was going to be a terrible candidate. We told you that you were an idiot if you voted for him. The problem is, if you take that attitude of sort of gloating over Trump's defeat, then you're playing into the very thing that gave rise to Trump in the first place, which is a feeling that the elites think that they're smarter than you and just think you're a bunch of idiots.
Selena, it's astounding. I guess if my glass is half full toward the former president, I would say he really is a forgiving guy. I mean, you're never dead to Trump. You can fall in and out of his orbit.
Look, I think there's a nuance that people are missing. Trump received more votes in 2020 than he did in 2017. And that's because people change their minds. People change their minds all the time. They can literally loathe someone and end up voting for them 4 years later. That's why traditionally presidents get more votes in their second in their reelect. Barack Obama was one of the few candidates who didn't do that. So I think that and the other nuance is there are voters, primary voters in Pennsylvania, that are really mad that he did this. However, that does not mean they don't like him anymore. And it goes to that point where people always call Trump voters members of a cult. I think that proves that is not the case. They don't go in lockstep with everything that he does.
If Dr. Oz loses here's what I hear you saying. If Dr. Oz loses the race and all of a sudden the world of punditry says, oh, what a major setback for Donald Trump, I hear Selena Zito saying, not really. His supporters will still be for him, even if they weren't on this pick.
It's definitely that. Although, I think we should also keep in mind, if Oz loses, if Perdue loses in Georgia, if Liz Cheney wins in Wyoming, all of a sudden things start to change, because then that's not telling you that people don't like Trump anymore, but that is telling you that, as I've always said, Trump support, the populist conservative coalition was not caused by him. He was the result of it, and they may be moving on. In politics, it is always like tectonic plates. There's always movement, and we tend to miss that because it's just a tiny shift.
Selena Zito, the Trump whisperer. Happy Easter.
Happy Easter. Thank you.
Let's check in on your tweets and Facebook comments. What do we got? Bad moves. Trump's hold on the party could weaken if his, quote unquote, his guys lose, and he's clearly endorsing name recognition candidates. Mark, Dr. Langer, I don't get it. I mean, you know, in Ohio, the party apparatus, they come out and they say, please don't go for J.D. Vance. And then you heard the clip that I played. What does Trump do? Like, you tell him not to do it. Frankly, the apparatus in Ohio, the GOP apparatus, they should have said, Mr. President, will you please endorse J.D. Vance? He'd have probably endorsed Tim Ryan. Still to come, more of your best and worst tweets and Facebook comments. We will give you the result of the survey question at smerconish.com. Please go vote right now. Do you want Elon Musk to take over Twitter? This is going to be interesting. By the way, I don't get the results in advance. I do not. When you vote, you see the result. I have yet to vote on this. Do you want Elon Musk to take over Twitter? That's the survey question at smerconish.com. Yes or no? Here are the results. No! 79%? You must be joking. 21,000 voted. Well, I will still vote. I'm going to leave that survey question up and try and turn the tide, and I will be among those who says yes. Yes, I do. The guy is, in my view, a First Amendment free speech absolutist. Now I tried to convince you of this in my opening commentary. I guess I failed. But now being manipulated by the far left and the far right. Like, he's one of ours. Oh, no, he's one of theirs. And then everybody lockstep. Oh, is he a conservative? Is he a liberal? He's like the majority of the country. He's somewhere in between. He's an independent, critical thinker. And by the way, I don't think he's motivated by profit in this. He could make a lot more dough focusing his energies on cars and rockets. So, just saying. All right, social media, Catherine, what do we have? What do we got? I'm really floored by that. All the rad right support, a renewable energy forward-thinking mogul taking over the biggest social media platform. Love it, says Christopher Lento. Yeah, it's like the very people who now are fearful of Musk and his First Amendment or free speech absolutism, overlooking, what he's already contributed to society with electric vehicles. Does anybody think that the F-150s would be rolling off the line, I think in the next week, the electrified versions, if Musk hadn't cleared that path? I don't. Wish I had more time, but I don't. Okay, happy Passover. Happy Easter, everybody. Thank you for watching. Keep voting at smerconish.com. Let's try and turn the tide on the Elon Musk question. See you next week.
everyone. Thank you so much for joining me. I'm Frederica Whitfield. All right, we begin with new strikes in Ukraine today, shelling across the country and even in the capital city of Kyiv. The mayor saying explosions killed at least one person and injured several others. And he's warning those who fled the city that they should not return yet. All of this comes as we're getting a clearer picture of the devastation left after Russian forces withdrew from areas around Kyiv. Ukrainian officials say bodies of 900 innocent civilians have been discovered there. And in the south, the once proud city of Mariupol decimated.
The enemy cannot seize Mariupol. The enemy may seize the land that Mariupol used to stand on, but the city of Mariupol is no more. The city of Mariupol has been wiped off the face of the earth by the Russian Federation.
Ukrainian officials say Russia's renewed assaults in the southern part of the country are in retaliation for the sinking of a prized Russian warship in the Black Sea. And Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is warning Russia could be on the verge of using tactical nuclear weapons. Yet, hope remains as Italy's ambassador to Ukraine returns to Kyiv today to reopen the Italian embassy. And France is signaling it may soon do the same. As Kyiv is getting hit with new attacks today in Lviv, to the west, air defenses were activated in the early morning hours. Here now is CNN's Matt Rivers.
Well, Fred, we were awoken here in Lviv by air raid sirens around 5:45 a.m. Local time this morning. And while that's not totally uncommon here in Lviv, what is a bit more uncommon is getting detailed information from the Ukrainians about what caused those air raid sirens to go off. So after they went off, we were under that air raid warning for about an hour and a half. We got word from Ukrainian officials that those sirens went off because they say that Russian warplanes that took off from air bases in neighboring Belarus launched 4 cruise missiles to unspecified targets in the Lviv region, with the Ukrainians saying that they successfully shot down those cruise missiles using air defense systems in this region. But Lviv, not the only area that was targeted by Russian attacks overnight. We know such an attack took place in a southeastern district of the city of Kyiv, with the city's mayor saying at least one person was killed, several other people injured when a Russian attack damaged buildings in this southeastern district of the city, with rescue workers continuing to be on scene throughout Saturday afternoon as officials work to get a better sense of the overall situation. And we're also getting more word from the Ukrainians about the Russian military buildup in the eastern part of the country, with Ukrainian defense officials outlining how there are some 22 Russian battalion tactical groups, or BTGs, consisting of about 1,000 Russian soldiers each, that are now centered around the city of Izum, with the understanding that those troops could eventually move south and east into the Donbass region. This is the part of the country where defense officials say this latest Russian ground campaign, this latest offensive, will likely kick off in earnest in a much more scaled up way in the coming days and weeks from now. So this is the latest going on around Ukraine at this point, not only as we watch and wait for this offensive in the eastern part of the country, but also more isolated attacks in other parts as well. Fred?
Matt Rivers, thank you so much. All right, turning now to Mykolaiv, where Ukraine says Russia is retaliating after a strike sunk a prized warship. They describe the situation there as increasingly hostile. CNN's Ed Lavandera joins me live now from Odessa, just southwest of Mykolaiv. So, Ed, officials yesterday reported Russian forces used cluster munitions in the area. And what have you heard?
Well, we were in the city when those attacks were dropped on Mykolaiv. We saw evidence of those cluster munitions used on the ground as they hit various targets there, including just feet away from an Orthodox church. 5 people were killed. We are told that one of the 5 people was killed because they picked up the debris of an unexploded ordnance, and when they picked it up, it detonated, killing that person. So they're urging people not to touch anything that's falling on the ground in that Mykolaiv region. But those attacks are continuing today. In fact, the mayor of Mykolaiv sent out a picture and details saying that a kindergarten building was destroyed today in Mykolaiv, injuring one person, at least 3 different missile strikes there in the region. And to kind of give you a sense of why Mykolaiv is so important, it sits essentially on the western edge of the southern front of this war zone. And just about 35 miles east of Mykolaiv is the city of Kherson, and that is a city that has been occupied by Russian forces for some time. In fact, we've spoken with many people who have evacuated that city in the last few days. They describe horrific conditions, Russian soldiers pillaging homes, stealing from people, civilians there, a desperate situation for many of those people to get out. And that's why officials are saying that Mykolaiv is a new area of focus, or a renewed area of focus, because there has been some shelling going on for weeks, but the intensity has now picked up to an extensive degree. Exactly what is behind the strategy of all of this, it isn't really clear at this point, but it also doesn't really matter for the residents that are still living in that city. When we were there and listened to the attacks fall and rain down on the city, it was totally indiscriminate. There were civilian targets mostly targeted. Russian military officials are saying that one of the areas hit today was an artillery ammunition storage facility. But even if that's true, by and large, what we have seen is civilian areas, apartment buildings, and parks that have been targeted by Russian forces there in Mykolaiv. So it is an intensifying situation and a quickly changing situation in that city. Frederica?
All right, Ed Lavandera, thank you so much in Odessa. So the first shipment of newly approved U.S. military aid for Ukraine is expected to arrive in the region today. A senior defense official tells CNN the $800 million in weapons and equipment will be picked up at the border by Ukrainians and then taken into the country. CNN's Jasmine Wright joining us now from the White House. Jasmine, what more do we know about the new shipment?
Well, Fred, that new shipment is meant to meet the evolving needs of the Ukrainians as the fight is expected to shift to the Donbas region in the coming days. And now we know that that's expected to be more of a clear and open type of battlefield. So for the first time, the U.S. approved more high-power weaponry to really meet the new needs of the Ukrainians. And so when we talk about what is given, we know that they gave those howitzer cannons, really essential for long range, as you can see on the screen here. Those howitzer cannons essential for long-range targets. Those Mi-17 helicopters, something that Ukrainian President Zelensky really pressured President Biden to give, and that'll be good for quickly transporting things across the battlefield, as well as those Switchblade drones, again for long-range targets. So it's definitely essential equipment here that President Zelensky was advocating for quite some time for the U.S. to send. Now, Pentagon Secretary John Kirby explained more of the thinking behind this new shipment here when he was talking to CNN's Jake Tapper on Thursday. Take a listen.
We think that the terrain there, which is a little like Kansas, it's flat, it's open like you described, Jake, will lend itself for the Russians to use mechanized forces in columns and open formations, artillery, short-range and even long-range fires. Those are the kinds of capabilities that you want to make sure the Ukrainians have as well. So we're deliberately tailoring this package to try to meet the needs of the fight they have today, because they are fighting in the Donbas today, and the fight that we think is coming in the days and weeks to come.
So there we heard from Kirby talking about the why, but let's be clear here, Fred. Some of these weapons that were approved in this latest shipment, just a few weeks ago, some Biden administration officials felt like they would be too escalatory to be sent and were against it, too escalatory viewed than by Russia. But of course, now that has changed. Now, one thing that I want to say, Fred, is that it kind of seems like Russia has noticed, as we know that officials say that they sent an official diplomatic note to the State Department, really protesting the ongoing equipment, weaponry being sent to Ukraine, saying, in no uncertain terms to stop it, that there would be consequences. And this came as the U.S. was preparing that latest $800 million shipment of assistance that is expected to be delivered in just the next few hours here. Fred?
All right, Jasmine Wright, thank you so much at the White House. All right, let me bring in now Congressman Raja Krishnamurthy. He's a Democrat from Illinois and a member of the House Intel Committee. Congressman, always good to see you. Just last week you said you thought the U.S. needed to escalate its military assistance to Ukraine. Is that what this is to you?
Yes, and I think that the only thing that Vladimir Putin respects is force. And the only thing that we can do to make sure that he feels that force is to escalate and accelerate those shipment of arms to the Ukrainians to make sure that they beat them on the battlefield right now.
And so Russia now has also formally protested the weapons shipments by the U.S. As if Russia has put itself in a position where it needs to, every country needs to seek its approval. I mean, what do you think when Russia now says this could lead to unpredictable consequences?
Well, I think, first of all, it shows that the shipments are working in terms of enabling the Ukrainians to really exact tremendous damage on the Russians. And by the way, I have to say that the Ukrainians themselves have been incredibly resourceful. You know, those Neptune missiles that they fired at the Moskva were Ukrainian-produced missiles. And the Russians took a terrible toll in losing that ship. I think with regard to these consequences, at this point, we don't know what that means. But obviously, if the Russians feel that they are going to be able to attack NATO territory for these shipments of arms, that would escalate the conflict tremendously. And I think that's something that the Russians should think twice about.
But you don't see that that Russia is now inferring that U.S. providing weapons is escalating, that it is a NATO nation that is now provoking Russia?
They could infer whatever they want, Frederica, but at this point, I think that providing arms to the Ukrainians of this type is completely appropriate. The Ukrainians are defending themselves from an unprovoked and unjustified attack by the Russians. We have to remember that the Russians initiated these hostilities, not the Ukrainians, and the Ukrainians have every right to defend themselves.
This week, Ukraine's President Zelensky asked President Biden to name Russia as a state sponsor of terror, and that would seem to escalate the level of sanctions against Russia even further. Do you believe that's something the U.S. should consider?
I think they should consider it. However, you know, naming them a state sponsor of terror would trigger a number of other types of sanctions that we would have to level against our allies and partners throughout the world, including the Europeans, including partners in Asia and so forth. And therefore, it's something that I think we would weigh very, very carefully before we took that step.
Zelensky also warned that it's his belief that Russia will resort to using limited nuclear weapons in Ukraine. Is that where this is going in your view?
Well, I think it's something that we have to be concerned about. Of course, that would be a dramatic escalation by the Russians. And I think one of the things that the Russians are probably thinking about as well is the use of such weapons could be lethal to Russians themselves. Remember that fallout could go into Russia. It could kill their own soldiers on the battlefield. And I think that it would be, in my opinion, catastrophic if it were to be used in Ukraine.
All right, Congressman Raja Krishnamurthy, always good to see you. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Frederica.
All right, coming up, it's a radio station hosted by Americans and broadcast in the U.S., but is backed by the Russian government. We'll take a look at the propaganda that they are saying on the public airwaves and how it is permitted. Plus, newly revealed text messages from 2 Republican members of Congress show they aggressively pushed the Trump White House to try to overturn the 2020 election results, but then changed their minds. A CNN exclusive straight ahead. A radio station sponsored by Russian state media and hosted by Americans is spreading war propaganda in 2 U.S. cities. CNN's Alex Marquardt looked into what is being said on the broadcast, and he's joining me right now. Alex, good to see you. So this seems rather extraordinary to be happening in the U.S. How'd you learn of this?
Yeah, it really is, Fred. Well, when I got home from Ukraine a couple of weeks ago here to Washington, D.C., someone told me you could still listen to Radio Sputnik here in D.C. Radio Sputnik is owned by the Russian government, and this is at a time when other Russian state-backed platforms or stations and networks were being taken off of different platforms because of the war in Ukraine. So I found this all rather surprising. I started listening to a lot of Radio Sputnik, and when they talk about the war in Ukraine, they talk about America's wars overseas and American hypocrisy. It's a lot of whataboutism, and it goes on to talk about they claim what we hear on Radio Sputnik is also very similar to what we're hearing now coming straight out of Moscow. Take a listen.
Sanctions are immoral.
Driving around downtown Washington, if you tune the radio to 105.5 FM, you land on Radio Sputnik, a station funded by a Russian state media agency, playing in the American capital on public airwaves. Here in D.C., you can listen to Sputnik on both FM and AM radio. Their shows are hosted by Americans, and they continue to broadcast even when other Russia-backed outlets have been taken off of platforms like YouTube and Facebook because of Russia's war in Ukraine. The hosts can often be heard parroting Kremlin talking points on Ukraine.
I already knew that Ukrainian Nazis were real. And when Putin started talking about it, I was like, well, it's about time you talk about it.
Host Lee Stranahan calls himself pro-Russian. And while the world condemns Russia for the atrocities in Bucha, where Ukrainians were bound and executed, some Sputnik hosts aren't convinced.
There's not much dispute about whether these atrocities actually occurred. I think the question is, who's responsible for doing it?
They claim to simply be offering a different viewpoint, asking questions, challenging the narrative, which often veers into seeing conspiracies, seeding doubt and distrust, classic elements of disinformation. The companies that put Sputnik on the air are forced to register as foreign agents with the Justice Department. Sputnik is required to tell listeners who backs them, a media group funded by the Russian government.
International Information Agency, Moscow, Russia.
None of the Sputnik hosts we reached out to would speak to us for this story, except Scotty Nell Hughes, a former CNN contributor who is a temporary fill-in host for the pro-Russia Lee Stranahan. We know that Russian state media is putting out lies about this conflict, and I say that as someone who was on the ground in Ukraine. So why should the United States tolerate having Russian state media on its public airwaves?
Let the American people make that decision. Trust the American people to hear what they're saying and make the decision for themselves whether or not they believe that that is the truth happening.
After the 2016 presidential election, the U.S. intelligence community, led by James Clapper, put out a report accusing Sputnik of being part of Russia's interference efforts.
There's this gray area of First Amendment protection rights versus an insidious presence in our country that is really there to weaken and destroy our system. That's really what this is about, and it's state-sponsored.
They don't want you to know that
Sputnik programming is only broadcast in 2 U.S. cities, Washington, D.C. and Kansas City, Missouri. RM Broadcasting helps get Sputnik on the air. Its owner, who lives in Florida, told us he, quote, stands with Ukraine. RM Broadcasting is dedicated to the unfettered exchange of information and ideas, Arnold Ferlito said. That freedom of choice is the ultimate underpinning of our republic. It isn't the job of the Federal Communications Commission, the FCC, to censor content either, Commissioner Jeffrey Starks told us. Instead, it's to let listeners know where that content is coming from.
The public must have transparency in order to be informed and make their own decisions about separating truth from disinformation. The FCC has given its authority here, given listeners transparency so that they can decide to change the dial.
Stark said he finds some of Sputnik's content deplorable, but on public airwaves, even if a station is backed by a country allegedly committing war crimes, they can, in the U.S., continue to broadcast. So, Frederica, it really does come down to this question of public versus private. Private companies like Facebook, YouTube, and other platforms can do whatever they want. They can kick anybody off that they want to. But the public airwaves really are still quite open. The FCC says that they're not necessarily in the business of censoring what is being said on stations like Sputnik, but they are going to require, the U.S. government is going to require these foreign-owned stations to reveal where it is that their programming is being backed by, and in this case, of course, it is Moscow, Russia. And so, in this case, when it comes to Sputnik being on the public airwaves, we should not expect them to go anywhere anytime soon. Frederica.
Wow, that's pretty extraordinary, incredible discovery that you made, Alex Marquardt. Thank you so much. All right, let's talk more about Vladimir Putin and what his next moves just might be. Let's bring in Jill Doherty. She's a CNN contributor and the former CNN Moscow bureau chief. So, Jill, good to see you. I mean, this is that radio station. I mean, that's a direct pipeline into the U.S. Promoting Putin's propaganda. Is it your sense that he has a direct hand in that, helping to facilitate that?
Yeah, there's no question, because Sputnik is run by the government. But I think Alex pointed out it's on 2 stations. Yeah, in 2 cities. Yeah. So the number of Americans who are listening to it, and actually I have listened to it sporadically, not particularly scintillating listening. So, I mean, you know, I try to look at the Russian media, what they're doing to their people. Yep. And that is markedly contrasting. I mean, right now, let's take the example of the Moskva, the ship that just sank. Yeah. That is a huge story. And domestically in Russia, it's very, very big, not only because of, you know, contemporary things, the war, the embarrassment of having a ship sink like that, but it also could remind Russians of another time, 20 years ago, 22 years ago, when the Kursk submarine sank. And that was a turning point. I mean, it's still a bitter memory of Russians when there was no war, but it sank. And President Putin had just come into office, and the information about it was shut down. And then they had to acknowledge that 118 guys died. We don't even know how many people have died on the Moskva. Right. And so the information for Russians is being shut down. Right, just yesterday, the Moscow Times Russian service significantly, and also Radio France International, which also broadcasts in Russian, shut down by the Russian government. So obviously, they're trying to control the information that their own people are getting about this war, let alone propagandize the rest of the world.
Right, and the way state media works, and correct me if I'm wrong, is the information they want to convey, of course, would be advantageous to the government. So when you have the ship that sank, is it being conveyed as, you know, this is the cost of war, or is it being reported in a more nefarious way, in that instead of it being, you know, the cost of war, retaliation in war, that instead the messaging is something else?
You know, it's a confusing message, Frederica, because that's often what happens with Russian media. So initially, and they're pretty much sticking to this, it was an accident, there was a fire, there was an explosion, it was towed in a storm, and then it sank. That's the official version. But then you look at Russian media, and there are now on Russian TV, it is almost all news and talk shows. And these talk shows sometimes seem a little far-fetched because they get a lot of characters on them. But they often raise issues, kind of like trial balloons about, you know, ideas. So just this week, there was one in which a person on that show actually said, oh, it was the Ukrainians. They were hunting that ship. They had this planned a long time ago. And of course, that contradicts what the official line is. And then also there are other people on these shows who say, well, actually, it's not the Ukrainians, it's the Americans, it's NATO. And so there is a lot of confusing, I would say, messaging going on by the government. But ultimately, and I think ominously, it does kind of lead back to not the Ukrainians, but more NATO, the United States, our big enemies are those.
So when the invasion, first began, Vladimir Putin gave out the false line that he was trying to rid Ukraine of Nazis. And now the rhetoric has shifted. We're hearing comments about Ukraine being a Satanistic country. What is being said, and how is this advantageous for Russia?
I watched that very closely because I was in Moscow right at the beginning of the war, and you could see the messaging. It was the government of Ukraine is run by Nazis. And it kind of hinted at the fact, or the opinion, that the Ukrainian people were kind of deceived or led by their Nazi, in quotes, which is completely fake, but that they were misled by their government. That is shifting now. And also, I'm using the word ominous. I think this is ominous. What the message now is more that the Ukrainian people themselves are Nazis, that the entire country is a Nazi country. And the demeaning language that is used right now in the Russian media for Ukrainians is really over the top. It is an old propaganda technique. Demean, pretend that make your enemy look like they're not even human.
Right,
and then of course it makes it easier to destroy them, to demonize, exactly. And so this idea of Satanism, I actually heard that word on their air, Satanism, and there are articles on this in the media. There's a religious element that is creeping into this, which is kind of an existential idea that Russia, is facing attack from these Satanistic forces. And it helps, I think, if you're in Moscow and you're trying to deny that there are human rights violations, it helps if you call the other guy a Satanist, because you know what Satanists do. These are old techniques, Frederica, and they were used, in the Soviet days. They're used in other countries, but it is striking to see how quickly this is changing.
Wow. And now the rhetoric is Russia is attempting to save humanity as a result. Extraordinary. Jill Doherty, thank you so much. All right, for more now about information on how you can help in the humanitarian efforts in Ukraine, go to cnn.com/impact. We'll be right back. All right, COVID cases on the increase in many parts of the country after a 2-month decline. People looking to get tested will soon have a new option. This week, the FDA greenlit an emergency use COVID breath test, the first of its kind, and all of this happening as New York health officials are alerting the public about 2 COVID subvariants in the state. Let's bring in now CNN's Polo Sandoval, who has been tracking these developments. So, Polo, tell us more.
Yeah, the breath test certainly going to come at a perfect time with this increase that we've seen throughout much of the country, though. What really has authorities concerned, though, is an increase that we have seen here in New York, specifically in the central part of the state. In fact, the average number of cases has nearly doubled in just the last 2 weeks. When you look at that map, it really does speak for itself there. These 2 offshoots of the BA2 variant are to blame. In fact, for the Finger Lakes region, much of the central portion of New York State, those 2 variants are to blame for about 90% of those cases. It's unclear, though, if these new variants will basically become the dominant strain here in New York and throughout much of the country. Health officials say that's still too early to tell, and this is not the first time that these subvariants are detected. In fact, tracking efforts have noticed them throughout much of the country. Global tracking efforts have already located them in places like Germany, in the UK, India as well. So it's certainly not a time to panic, but it's certainly a time to just re-emphasize those recommendations that we've heard from officials for well over 2 years now. In fact, the daily number of reported cases right now, it's still just a fraction of what we experienced during the Omicron surge in January. But again, nonetheless, this is still an experience or an opportunity to really re-emphasize those recommendations. We heard recently from New York State's health commissioners saying that even though these subvariants are new, the tools that we currently have to actually protect ourselves, Fred, those are certainly not new, right? Get vaccinated, get boosted. If you can, continue to wear masks indoors as well.
All right. And Polo, people love to go to their Broadway shows. So tell us more about the extension now of these mask protocols.
Yeah, you have the owners and operators of about 40 different theaters who decided to extend the current mask requirement through at least the end of May, so basically requiring masks if you're going to enjoy one of the Broadway shows. But also many will not be checking vaccination status after April 30th, so that's also important to keep in mind. The Broadway League estimating that since they reopened last fall, they've welcomed about 5 million audience members at shows on Broadway. So that's certainly an indication that people are still enjoying Broadway right now, Fred, though they're going to have to keep that mask on for at least a little while longer.
Right. People want to get out, and it also means being in, but you got to be safe. All right. Thank you so much, Polo Sandoval. Appreciate that. All right, we need ammo. We need fraud examples. We need it this weekend. I'm quoting now. Text messaging. CNN's exclusive on the text messages to Trump's former White House Chief of Staff, Mark Meadows, in the weeks leading up to the insurrection. What those texts reveal about attempts to overturn the election next. Welcome back. A CNN exclusive uncovers a series of text messages between two of former President Trump's most vocal supporters on Capitol Hill and then White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows. The texts were sent in the weeks between the 2020 election and the January 6th insurrection. They show that some lawmakers were in favor of overturning the election results until they discovered there was no evidence to back up the claims. Here now is CNN's Ryan Nobles.
Senator Mike Lee of Utah and Congressman Chip Roy of Texas, two of former President Donald Trump's most loyal defenders in Congress. But in dozens of private texts to Trump's Chief of Staff Mark Meadows, a picture emerges of how both went from aiding the effort to challenge the election results to ultimately warning against it. The texts obtained by CNN show how they were trying to help initially, but by the end raised concerns to Trump's top deputy about his campaign's effort to stand in the way of the certification of the 2020 election. "We're driving a stake in the heart of the federal republic," Roy warned Meadows in a text message on January 1st that is in possession of the January 6th Select Committee.
All my friends here in the
His stark warning came after weeks of begging Meadows for hard evidence of election fraud and concerns that the lack of specific evidence was a real problem for the Trump legal team. "We must urge the president to tone down the rhetoric," he wrote to Meadows on November 9th.
Why is the Attorney General?
Roy did believe that there were problems with the election. In early December, he went to the House floor, imploring his colleagues to look into the thin examples of fraud.
The American people are raising legitimate questions about our elections, and this body is missing in action and doing nothing.
Like Roy, Senator Mike Lee started out hopeful that there was a path to challenge the election results. In early November, he touted the work of conservative lawyer Sidney Powell, encouraging Meadows to get her an audience with the president, calling her a, quote, straight shooter. But less than 2 weeks later, Powell appeared with Rudy Giuliani in what would become an infamous press conference where the duo made wild, baseless claims about the election.
President Trump won by a landslide. We are going to prove it.
Lee then changed his tune, calling Powell a liability and turning his focus to touting attorney John Eastman. Lee pushed a plan to convince state legislatures to offer up a set of alternate electors. When that plan fizzled, Lee decided he was no longer on board. He texted Meadows on December 16th, quote, "I think we're now past the point where we can expect anyone will do it without some direction and a strong evidentiary argument." Both Lee and Roy ultimately chose not to join other Republicans to vote against certifying the election.
Our job is to open and then count. Open, then count. That's it. That's all there is.
Privately, they were even more emphatic about the fool's errand Trump's team was on. "The president should call everyone off. It's the only path," Roy texted Meadows on December 31st. While Lee argued the effort was on dangerous constitutional ground. 3 days before January 6th, he warned, "I know only that this will end badly for the president unless we have the Constitution on our side." They did not. But the Trump team and a group of loyal Republicans went ahead with their plan anyway. As it became clear their effort would not be successful, hundreds of Trump supporters stormed the Capitol in protest. As the violence was raging, Roy texted Meadows, "Fix this now."
Does the gentleman from Texas?
He then went to the House floor and placed the blame squarely at President Trump's feet.
And the president should never have spun up certain Americans to believe something that simply cannot be.
Now, both the congressional offices of these two gentlemen did respond to our story. Neither denied the text's authenticity. Senator Mike Lee's office said that the senator was transparent during this period of time and nothing contradicts his public statements that are revealed in these texts. Meanwhile, Congressman Chip Roy responded to the story by saying, quote, "No apologies for my private texts or public positions to those on the left or the right. I stand behind seeking truth, fighting nonsense, and then acting in defense of the Constitution." These texts obviously in the possession of the January 6th Select Committee, and they remain an important part of that investigation. Ryan Nobles, CNN on Capitol Hill.
Extraordinary revelations. All right, thank you so much, Ryan. Still ahead, how music is helping to boost the spirits of Ukrainians during their darkest hours. Meet the Ukrainian Bruce Springsteen next. Well, just as prayer can lift people, so can song, which is why a Ukrainian rock star is using his voice and influence to lift civilian spirits in this time of war. CNN's Rafael Romo has the story.
There was the orchestra that performed a concert for peace in a public square in the middle of the day, in spite of the danger of an airstrike. And the cellist who defied the invaders by playing his instrument in front of bombed-out buildings. And who can forget the little girl with the sweetest voice who made those around her forget they were in a bomb shelter? One by one, singers and musicians in Ukraine have defied the Russians by using their talent to unite a nation and soothe a terrified population.
We love singing.
The most famous one is Sviatoslav Bararchuk, better known as Slava, whom some call the Ukrainian Bruce Springsteen.
Dignity and freedom are basic values.
At the beginning of the invasion, Slava could have chosen to flee the country. Instead, he decided not only to stay, but to visit terrified civilians like these people seeking shelter in a Kharkiv subway station. You went to a subway station by yourself where there were many people and unannounced, and you started singing. Why did you do something like that? The whole idea, Slava says, is to help people forget, even if it is for a fleeting moment, about the horror of war.
Imagine somebody like me comes and say, "Hey guys, everything is fine. Let's sing together. Let's have some fun.
Let's forget for a moment that we're at war."
Yeah, this is it.
And so he's visited hospitals like this one in Mykolaiv to cheer up victims of a rocket attack, survivors of an airstrike at a train station in Kramatorsk, and troops on the front lines. Songs, Slava says, are his answer to Russian bullets. Empathy and goodwill are more powerful than any bomb.
Ukrainians are one of the most, the freest nations in the world. We have this gene of freedom in our DNA. That's why probably many Americans instinctively, intuitively support us now.
In the streets, people greet him and ask for pictures. Slava happily obliges and takes the opportunity to give everybody the same message: everything will be all right, which happens to be the title of one of his songs, his most popular nowadays. I hope that everything is going to be all right for everybody, the song says. Our time is going to come. Rafael Romo, CNN, Lviv, Ukraine.
Hello again, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me. I'm Frederica Whitfield. All right, happening right now, Russia unleashing a new round of strikes across Ukraine. Thick black smoke rising in eastern towns and cities. A massive fire at a fuel depot in the Luhansk region. And officials say shelling overnight almost damaged several gas pipelines. Air raid sirens blaring in eastern Ukraine and even in the capital city of Kyiv today. Kyiv's mayor, in fact, saying explosions killed at least one person and injured several others. And he's warning those who fled the city that they should not try to return. We're also getting a vivid picture of the horrors left as Russian forces retreated from Kyiv. Ukrainian officials say bodies of 900 innocent civilians have been discovered there so far. And in the south, the besieged port city of Mariupol is a hollow shell of its former self.
The enemy cannot seize Mariupol. The enemy may seize the land that Mariupol used to stand on, but the city of Mariupol is no more. The city of Mariupol has been wiped off the face of the earth by the Russian Federation.
Ukrainian officials say Russia's renewed assaults in the southern part of the country are in retaliation for the sinking of a prized Russian warship in the Black Sea. And Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is warning Russia could be on the verge of using tactical nuclear weapons. Officials in Mykolaiv, Ukraine, describe the situation there as increasingly hostile. CNN's Ed Lavandera joining me live now from Odessa. So, Ed, the mayor of Mykolaiv says Russian troops attacked a kindergarten this morning. What more can you tell us?
Well, these are images coming from the mayor of Mykolaiv, who says that the city is once again under shelling today. At least 3 different missile attacks that have struck from what we've been able to gather so far. And one of those locations hit appears to be a kindergarten building. The mayor of Mykolaiv says that one person has been injured. And this kind of essentially goes with what we have seen. We were in Mykolaiv yesterday when various strikes hit that city. It all appeared very indiscriminate, targeting civilian areas, and that has instilled a great amount of fear among the city's residents. The cluster of explosions jolted this residential neighborhood in Mykolaiv Friday morning. Witnesses say some people were walking their dogs in a park at the time. One of the munitions struck just feet away from an Orthodox church. You can see the impact spot of one of the munitions that went off this morning. And as you look around here, you can see the impact and the damage done to this church here as well. Multiple people were killed and more than a dozen others injured. Paramedics treated victims on the scene. Across the street, under the shattered windows of an apartment building, this man told us he helped drag 2 injured people into a store for safety.
Шум ракеты.
Noise. The noise of a rocket flying and explosions. That's what I saw and heard when I was in the shop. People ran into the store and I saw people scared. I saw people dropping to the ground from explosions.
The sounds of explosions inside the city started around mid-morning and appeared to strike at least 3 different locations. Mykolaiv authorities released this video of a private home burning after a rocket strike. Mykolaiv strikes come as residents in southern Ukraine are worried about Russian retaliation for the sinking of the Moskva warship in the Black Sea and Russia's renewed offensive in eastern Ukraine. In recent days, CNN has witnessed long convoys of families fleeing Russian-occupied areas near Mykolaiv. This bombing struck a densely populated area. Galina Mironchuk says she was brushing her hair when the bomb landed just outside her apartment window. The blast shattered the glass and shattered her sense of peace. Did you think something was going to happen to you? I didn't think of anything, she tells me. I thought that was the end of the world. The recent attacks have also crippled parts of the city's infrastructure. The water has been out for 3 days, forcing hundreds of people to get water from a river and natural spring. This man evacuated his mother and plans to stay in the city to fight off the Russians. How worried are you that the Russians are getting closer? It worries me a lot, he tells me. That's why I sent my mother away. That's why we are getting ready. We are still working, but if the Russians are close, I will fight them. For now, residents are left to clean up the bloody aftermath and brace for the next attack. And Frederica, the residents there in Mykolaiv now dealing with a fourth day without water, we understand. And to give you a sense of why Mykolaiv is so strategically important at this moment in the war, just about 35 miles to the east of Mykolaiv, this is along the coastline going back toward Mariupol, is the city of Kherson. This is a city that has been under Russian occupation for several weeks now. And if you travel to any kind of area around Mykolaiv there, you will find, in those convoys of people that we showed you, people escaping Kherson who have been under very dire situations in that city for the last several weeks. So it's a huge difference between, in that 35-mile stretch, in that contested area, you're essentially here on the western edge of the southern front of this war, and that's why you see so much Ukrainian resources going into essentially holding the line here, trying to keep the Russian forces at bay. And that will be a deciding and monumental kind of task here in the weeks ahead.
Oh my gosh,
Frederica?
so frightening to think what could be happening there, especially after you just revealed to us what's happening in Mykolaiv. All right, thank you so much, Ed Lavendera, I appreciate it. As Kyiv is getting hit with new attacks today, in Lviv to the west, air defenses were activated in the early morning hours. Here now is CNN's Matt Rivers' report.
Well, Fred, we were awoken here in Lviv by air raid sirens around 5:45 a.m. Local time this morning. And while that's not totally uncommon here in Lviv, what is a bit more uncommon is getting detailed information from the Ukrainians about what caused those air raid sirens to go off. So after they went off, we were under that air raid warning for about an hour and a half. We got word from Ukrainian officials that those sirens went off because they say that Russian warplanes that took off from air bases in neighboring Belarus launched 4 cruise missiles to unspecified targets in the Lviv region, with the Ukrainians saying that they successfully shot down those cruise missiles using air defense systems in this region. But Lviv, not the only area that was targeted by Russian attacks overnight. We know such an attack took place in a southeastern district of the city of Kyiv, with the city's mayor saying at least one person was killed, several other people injured when a Russian attack damaged buildings in this southeastern district of the city, with rescue workers continuing to be on scene throughout Saturday afternoon as officials work to get a better sense of the overall situation. And we're also getting more word from the Ukrainians about the Russian military buildup in the eastern part of the country, with Ukrainian defense officials outlining how there are some 22 Russian battalion tactical groups, or BTGs, consisting of about 1,000 Russian soldiers each, that are now centered around the city of Izum, with the understanding that those troops could eventually move south and east into the Donbass region. This is the part of the country where defense officials say this latest Russian ground campaign, this latest offensive, will likely kick off in earnest in a much more scaled up way in the coming days and weeks from now. So this is the latest going on around Ukraine at this point, not only as we watch and wait for this offensive in the eastern part of the country, but also more isolated attacks in other parts as well. Fred?
All right, Matt Rivers, thank you so much. And now we're just getting in this new video of shelling at a market in a town in the eastern part of Ukraine. A CNN crew witnessed the strikes in the Luhansk region. The video shared on social media and geolocated by CNN showing burning buildings following an attack at that market earlier today. No word yet on casualties. All right, the first shipment of newly approved U.S. military aid for Ukraine is expected to arrive in the region today. A senior defense official telling CNN that the $800 million in weapons and equipment will be picked up at the border by Ukrainians and taken into the country. CNN's Jasmine Wright joining us now from the White House with more on this, Jasmine. So what more do we know about this shipment?
Well, Fred, the shipment is expected to really try to meet the evolving needs of Ukrainian fighters as that fight is expected to shift to the Donbas region, as we just heard Matt talking about really in depth. And that's supposed to be more of a clear and open type of battlefield, a bit different than that city warfare that we've seen in the first few weeks of that invasion. And so for the first time, the U.S. has really agreed to send more highly advanced weaponry to Ukrainians. And when we're talking about in terms of what that shipment is going to look like, we know that it includes those howitzer cannons that are good for that long range targets, as we can see on the screen here. Helicopters, something that President Zelensky has personally advocated for from President Biden, something that will be good for them to transport things quickly along the battlefield. Switchblade drones, again, for that long range targets, and other types of equipment here. And we know that when it comes to the reasons why they are switching to this high power weaponry, John Kirby, Pentagon spokesperson, talked about it in depth when he was on air with Jake Tapper just this week. Take a listen.
We think that the terrain there, which is a little like Kansas, it's flat, it's open like you described, Jake, will lend itself for the Russians to use mechanized forces in columns and open formations, artillery, short-range and even long-range fires. Those are the kinds of capabilities that you want to make sure the Ukrainians have as well. So we're deliberately tailoring this package to try to meet the needs of the fight they have today, because they are fighting in the Donbas today, and the fight that we think is coming in the days and weeks to come.
So there we heard from John Kirby talking about the why, but let's be clear here, Fred, which is that some of these high-power weaponry that are now approved to be sent, just a few weeks ago, some Biden administration officials were against sending them because they felt that they would be too escalatory, viewed as that way by Russia. But again, things have now changed down the line, and it is something that Russia appears to have noticed, as U.S. officials say that they sent a diplomatic note to the State Department really protesting formally the ongoing shipment of weaponry to Ukraine, really warning of unpredictable consequences if it should continue. And this happened as the U.S. was preparing that $8 million package of weaponry that is expected to, at least some of the first shipments are expected to land in just the next few hours. Fred?
All right, Jasmine, right. Thank you so much. All right, coming up, text messages reveal how two Trump GOP congressional allies lobbied the White House to challenge the election, but ultimately came to sour on the effort, and the tactics deployed by Trump and his team. Our exclusive reporting straight ahead. All right, welcome back. Never before seen text messages show how two Republican lawmakers and Trump allies went from encouraging the White House's efforts to overturn the presidential election to warning against it. CNN's Zach Cohen joining us now with more on this in this CNN exclusive. So Zach, walk us through what the text messages reveal about the evolution of these two lawmakers' views on overturning the election, starting with Texas Congressman Chip Roy.
Yeah, Fred, it's important to remember that these are two of former President Donald Trump's most ardent defenders in Congress, and yet they both ultimately reach a conclusion that the Trump team's efforts to overturn the election, they sour on that at the end. Now, starting with Chip Roy, on the day that the election was called for Joe Biden, Chip Roy reaches out to then Chief of Staff Mark Meadows and says, dude, we need ammo, we need fraud examples, we need it this weekend, making clear that he's willing and ready to help in the effort to challenge Joe Biden's victory, but he's going to need evidence and examples of voter fraud to do it. Now, as the next couple weeks progress, Congressman Chip Roy becomes a little bit more concerned about what he's seeing from the Trump team. A week and a half after that initial text, he reaches out to Meadows again and says, we need substance or people are going to break. Now, obviously, having evidence and examples of voter fraud continues to be a theme, and by late December, Chip Roy has essentially seen enough, and he warns Mark Meadows that the president should call everyone off, referring to efforts to challenge and subvert the Electoral College and overturn the election itself. And then, of course, Congressman Roy sent an iconic text message on January 1st saying that we are driving a stake in the heart of the federal republic. So when you look at that, all those texts together at one time, it really speaks to the evolution of how Congressman Roy came from one of Trump's most ardent defenders in Congress and willing to help overturn the election to someone who clearly thought that that was a bad idea.
Mm-hmm. And then there's Senator Mike Lee. What about him? What concerns did he express in the text messages?
Right, and like Congressman Roy, Mike Lee was initially very supportive and reached out to Meadows with a message of support for the former president, saying, look, you need to keep fighting, Mr. President, stay strong. Really encouraging the former president to fight and challenge the election outcome, knowing that on that day the election had been called for Joe Biden. Now, Lee, in a similar fashion to Congressman Roy, his concerns would grow over time. We see by November 19th, after he had already been pushing and advocating for various attorneys that were pushing conspiracy theories about the election and spreading unfounded claims, he's reaches out to Meadows with concerns about one in particular. That's Sidney Powell, Trump's then attorney. He says, I'm worried about the Powell press conference, referring to a press conference where Powell and other Trump attorneys stood up and continued to publicly air various conspiracies about the election. And then at this time, in the days that followed, Senator Lee seems a little bit at loss. He texts Meadows 2 days later and says, please tell me what I should be saying. Now, like Roy, by the end of December, Senator Mike Lee started to reach the conclusion that this was not the right path to take. He says, I think we're now past the point where we can expect anyone will do it without some direction and a strong evidentiary argument, referring to other senators voting to block certification of Joe Biden's win. And then, of course, 3 days before the Capitol riot, Senator Lee texts Mark Meadows and says, I only know that this will end badly for the president unless we have the Constitution on our side. Now, Fred, of course they did not, and of course it did end badly for both the former president and for the country on January 6th.
And so what might this mean for the broader investigation now?
So these text messages are among those that are already in the possession of the January 6th committee. We know that they are a crucial part of their investigation, as are other messages that Mark Meadows handed over voluntarily. Now, it remains to be seen how those will be factored in, but you can be sure that they will be and remain an integral part of their probe.
Mm-hmm. And of course, the suspicion is this is only a tiny part of the massive amount of information the committee is actually collecting. What else do we know about the investigation?
So just Mark Meadows alone handed over thousands of records, including thousands of text messages, and we know that the committee has interviewed over 850 witnesses so far. Now, most of their work is happening behind closed doors, so it's difficult to know exactly what information they've received and what questions are still left to be answered. But they've been doing work for months on this investigation and are looking at public hearings and a final report sometime in the next several months. So it remains to be seen what that final product will look like, but you can be sure that there's much more information out there, and the committee will do its best to present it in a way that is compelling and teaches the American people exactly what they found.
Yeah, everyone needs that transparency. All right, Zach Cohen, thank you so much. All right, still ahead, Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky tells CNN's Jake Tapper that all of the countries of the world should be prepared for the possibility that Russia could use tactical nuclear weapons. All right, there's a possibility that Russia's war on Ukraine could soon enter an even more deadly phase. Moscow has warned of unpredictable consequences if the U.S. continues to supply weapons to Ukraine. And the Ukrainian president says the world should be prepared for Vladimir Putin to unleash tactical nuclear weapons. Our Jake Tapper sat down Friday for an exclusive interview with Vladimir Zelensky and asked him about that.
The director of the CIA warned that he's worried Putin might use a tactical nuclear weapon in this fight. Are you worried?
Not only me. I think all of the world, all the countries have to be worried, because you know that it can be not real information, but it can be the truth. Because when they begin to speak about one or another battles or involves enemies or nuclear weapons or some chemical, issues, chemical weapons, they should do it. They could do it. I mean, so they can. For them, life of the people is nothing. That's why we should think, not be afraid. I mean, that not be afraid, be ready, but that is not the question to Ukraine, and not only for the Ukraine, for all the world. I think so.
A Russian warship, the Moskva, the one that Ukrainian soldiers told to F off, sank. The Russians say, and the Russians are liars, but the Russians say it sank on its own. Can you offer some clarity and evidence as to what happened to that ship?
We know that it does not exist anymore. For us, it is a strong weapon against our country. So its sinking is not a tragedy for us. I want you, the rest of the people, to realize that. The less weapons the Russian Federation that attacked our country has, the better for us. The less capable they are.
And you can see Jake's full interview with President Zelensky on State of the Union tomorrow at 9 a.m. only here on CNN. All right, let's bring in now Cedric Layton. He is a CNN military analyst and retired U.S. Air Force colonel. Good to see you. So we just heard President Zelensky say he is concerned about the use of tactical nuclear weapons by Russia and that all of the world should be concerned. So given that, how does all of the world protect itself or brace itself for that kind of potentiality?
Yeah, Fred, that's one of the biggest problems that we have right now. We're dealing with, in essence, what amounts to nuclear proliferation by a nuclear power, potentially. So what I would say, the world has to be prepared for the Russians. I agree with President Zelensky that the Russians may very well feel that they are cornered enough that they may want to use something like a tactical nuclear weapon. Now, that would be a game changer, because what it ends up doing is it ends up, changing not only how the war is fought, but the kinds of weapons that are fought within that war. And it would necessitate some kind of a response from countries that are not directly involved in the current fight in Ukraine. So we have to be ready. We have to be ready to respond. And we have to make sure that the sanctions that would result from something like that would be sanctions that would really fight against Russia. And it probably would have to go beyond sanctions, frankly.
So Zelensky, said, don't be afraid, but be ready. And that's what you're saying, too, be ready. But then what kind of military weaponry do you have at hand to respond to the potential use of any kind of nuclear activity?
Well, that points to a gap in our current weapons arsenal. We don't have something that is really good against a tactical nuclear weapon unless you stop the weapon from being launched in the first place. So failing that, we would be in a situation where that kind of a weapon would be used before we could respond to it, and that, of course, is a horrible prospect, to think about. The way it would, basically work is the weapon would be detonated, and then radiation would, ensue from that, and it could potentially affect NATO countries. And if it does that, that could potentially invoke Article 5 of the NATO treaty.
Mm-hmm. So let's talk about what we do know right now, sort of. We know, or at least Ukraine is expecting, the first shipment of newly approved U.S. military aid for that country today. That's the expectation. Here is a look at some of the equipment. There are helicopters involved that initially had been earmarked for Afghanistan. There are howitzer cannons, 300 more Switchblade drones, and ammunition. What can you tell us about the importance of any number of that arsenal and how this will potentially give Ukraine an advantage that it didn't have prior to this shipment?
Well, part of it has to do with quantity, and on the other side, it has to do with quality of the weapons that are being provided to Ukraine. So in terms of quantity and quality, the Switchblade drones are going to be a significant factor in this case. The Ukrainians already know how to use drones, and the Switchblade, especially the 600 model, is going to be a drone that will be, I think, highly effective against tank columns, against armored personnel carriers, and it's going to be a drone that the Ukrainians, if they get enough of them, which the numbers certainly indicate that they're going to be quite a large number being shipped to them. If they get enough of them, they can make a big difference on the battlefield. And it's going to be somewhat similar, but on a larger scale, to what happened between Armenia and Azerbaijan in the latest fight over Nagorno-Karabakh, where drones played a significant role and, in essence, routed a standard army in a way that wasn't expected. This could happen again with the Russians if the Ukrainians employ them well and use these Switchblade 600s in a way that is not only innovative but also integrates intelligence into the whole picture that they have.
What are some of the challenges that you see in trying to disperse some of that weaponry once it's already across the border and into country?
So the big challenge is the road and rail network, keeping that open, making sure it's not attacked by the Russians, either from the air or from the ground. The Ukrainians, of course, have to watch also against sabotage, the possibility that Russian irregular units, either from their military or from their intelligence services, get into a situation where they can cut the roads or cut the railroads. And we have to also remember that air transport is going to be very difficult within Ukraine. So it's basically going to be ground-based transport that is going to get these weapons to the places that they need to be, in other words, on the front line.
Oh boy. All right. So Russia's strategy, at least part of the strategy that I think the world has come to know, is that it wants to take hold of the Donbas region. If they succeed in that, what are some of the potential consequences that you see?
So I think one of the biggest things will be an economic consequence. I mean, obviously, Ukraine has huge economic difficulties that have been piled upon it by the invasion itself. But if the Russians take the Donbas, it's going to be about a third, to quarter to a third of the entire country in terms of geographic area. It's also an area that's rich in industry, it's rich in transportation areas, and it's, of course, ethnically Russian. But what's interesting about what has happened here is that I think the ethnic Russian population has basically turned on Russia because of the destruction that Russia has wrought on this area, and they're very much pro-Ukrainian based on what we see right now, and they want to stay in Ukraine. They don't want to go home to Russia, so to speak. They want to be part of a vibrant Ukraine that is democratic and that is able to handle things that are done in a way that allows Ukraine to integrate into Europe, and that part of the country, if it's taken by Russia, of course, would not be able to be integrated into Europe, at least not in the short term.
Colonel Cedric Layton, always good to see you. Thank you so much.
You bet, Frederica. Good to be with you.
Coming up, a flurry of new abortion restrictions across mostly Republican-led states is leaving neighboring states to fill the gap in abortion care. We'll discuss all of that with the CEO and founder of a women's health care clinic right after this. All right, welcome back. A wave of new anti-abortion laws hitting 4 states this week. Florida is the latest after Republican Governor Ron DeSantis signed into law a bill that bans the procedure after 15 weeks of pregnancy. That's without any exemptions for rape or incest. CNN's Nadia Romero is here with more on all this. Nadia.
Well, Fred, I mean, when we look at all of these states that are following this trend, it really sparked with 2 states, Texas and Mississippi. Mississippi back in 2018 that passed their 15-week abortion ban. Now that case is before the Supreme Court. Then it was Texas back in September with their 6-week abortion ban that many call the heartbeat bill, and that went into effect in September. Since then, Republican-led controlled legislatures all over the country have been passing these restrictive abortion bans, and we saw Florida and Oklahoma adding themselves to that growing list just this week.
No peace.
Using their voices and risking their freedoms.
No justice, no peace.
Caitlin Danahy-Samitz and Sarah Parker lead Women's Voices of Southwest Florida, a nonprofit organized to defend reproductive freedoms.
We have to speak up.
The group helped raise awareness when the Manatee County Board of Commissioners discussed the possibility of introducing an abortion ban.
I had to sit down. I cried. We had put so many hours and so much time in that. And we want something.
But their message was not loud enough to drown out the will of Florida's legislature and the governor.
It makes me angry and it makes me sad and it makes me worried. It feels like we're going backwards.
This week, Governor Ron DeSantis signing a 15-week abortion ban into law.
There you go.
Without exemptions for rape, incest, or human trafficking.
This will represent the most significant protections for life that have been enacted in this state in a generation.
2 days before DeSantis, Oklahoma Governor Kevin Stitt signed a bill that makes performing an abortion a felony, except in the case of a medical emergency.
We want Oklahoma to be the most pro-life state in the country. We want to outlaw abortion in the state of Oklahoma.
And also this week, Kentucky's GOP-led legislature overrode the governor's veto of a bill that bans most abortions after 15 weeks of pregnancy. So far, 18 states have introduced legislation banning or limiting access to most abortions. 14 states have passed their restrictive legislation. 3 states so far this year, Kentucky, Florida, and Arizona, following a 2018 Mississippi law prohibiting abortions after 15 weeks of pregnancy.
Now let's go and sign these bills.
Now, some Democratic-controlled legislatures aim to protect the rights of Roe v. Wade with new bills of their own. Maryland lawmakers expanding access to abortion.
We are preparing for some of the most restrictive abortion actions that we've seen in a generation.
In Michigan, Governor Gretchen Whitmer filing a lawsuit to challenge the state's almost 100-year-old abortion ban, even though it's not enforceable due to Roe v. Wade.
We've got to take this current assault on women's rights seriously and use every tool we have to fight back. This is not just a theoretical risk. This is a real and present danger.
With many states rewriting their abortion laws, all eyes point to the Supreme Court. The court heard arguments on the Mississippi law back in December. Legal experts argue a decision could be handed down in June, right before summer break, with pro-abortion activists continuing their fight to the highest court in the land.
Maybe they will come back and say and stand behind Roe versus Wade. I hope that they do, and I want to believe so.
So Florida Governor Ron DeSantis also signed another bill into law that provides aid for mentorship and educational programs for fathers in Florida. It also comes with $70 million for youth and family support services. But really, Fred, that's a sidebar to this 15-week abortion ban that the governor signed. And we're seeing a legal contestation all across the country with different groups like the ACLU battling against these legislatures as they push forward with these abortion bans.
Wow. All right. Thank you so much, Nadia. Appreciate that. We're going to talk about this even further. For more on these abortion laws, I want to bring in Amy Hagstrom Miller. She's the CEO of Whole Women's Health, which has abortion clinics nationwide. Amy, good to see you. So, your reaction to these new laws?
You know, unfortunately, I'm not surprised. I think we've seen this turn across the country when the status of the Supreme Court changed. It's sad to see this because these values and these laws do not represent the feelings and beliefs of the majority of people in this country. Most people support access to safe abortion, to be local in their communities. All of us know somebody and love somebody who's needed an abortion at some point in our lives, and our loved ones deserve respect and compassion. They don't deserve to be forced to travel and sort of navigate these stigma-ridden, shame-filled abortion restrictions.
So then how is your clinic helping people navigate the confusion that comes with some of these laws?
Sure. So you're absolutely right that these laws are designed to confuse people, to scare people, to delay their access. These laws don't do anything to prevent the need for abortion or to support people to plan their families. They just ban abortion and force people to travel. At Whole Women's Health, we have clinics in what are considered haven states, and we also have clinics in places like Texas and Indiana. And so we have already been helping people travel from Texas to other places in the country where they can get access to safe abortion. Keep in mind that the travel is actually more dangerous than the abortion itself. Abortion is very safe, and it should be available locally in people's communities. And people shouldn't have to travel hundreds of miles and wait, 4 to 6 weeks to have a procedure that is mainstream medicine and that almost 40% of people will need at some point in their lifetime. This isn't an extreme issue. This is directly connected to the status of women and the health and safety of our families.
So as you mentioned, from Texas to Indiana, what are the populations that are most impacted by these restrictions?
Yes, thank you for asking that, because these restrictions have much more impact on young people, on people of color, on people who don't have health insurance and who don't have the means to travel to get the abortion that they need. Texas is already one of the lowest in maternal mortality outcomes, even before these restrictions on abortion. Texas also has very few people with health insurance. And these impacts really affect those communities much more profoundly. And I think we're seeing a division in this country, both between the haven states and the restricted states, but we're also seeing divisions in people's access to health care generally in their communities. And abortion has directly linked to the status of women in this country. Access to safe abortion over the last 50 years has made our communities healthier, has made maternal mortality healthier, has made people's families healthier. And I think it's time we need to talk about the positive outcomes of access to safe abortion in this country over the last 50 years.
So now what advice do you have for women in states like Florida and Oklahoma, which have just enacted abortion bans similar to the one in Texas that your clinic continues to challenge?
So my advice for people is to know that abortion is still legal in this country, that the people who are trying to restrict your access to safe abortion don't reflect the values of the majority of people here. There are multiple networks in this country that are here to help you. Abortion funds, abortion clinics. We are here to guide you to the place where you can still get access to safe abortion. There are many networks helping people with travel, helping people with funding. Whole Women's Health and others all across the country are really trying to work together to mitigate the damage and the harm that is already being done by bills like SB 8 and the copycats across the country. And we are preparing for the infrastructure that's going to be needed to help people after the Dobbs decision comes down this summer.
All right, Amy Hagstrom Miller, good to see you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
And we'll be right back. All right, remember the phrase herd immunity? That's when enough people in an area develop immunity to a virus, providing an invisible safety net around the more vulnerable. So where does the U.S. stand now with COVID herd immunity? CNN health reporter Jacqueline Howard has been following the latest developments.
Frederica, this topic of herd immunity, it's a hot one. And my colleagues here at CNN Health talked to Dr. Anthony Fauci about this. He said, quote, the concept of classical herd immunity may not apply to COVID-19. And that, quote, means we're not going to be without SARS-CoV-2 in the population for a considerable period of time, end quote. So, Fred, when you look at other infectious diseases that we've eliminated, like measles, for instance, that required an extremely effective vaccine, enough people taking that vaccine, and a virus that doesn't change or mutate in significant ways over time. Now, with the virus that causes COVID-19, we've already seen it mutate a lot. And while more than 65% of the U.S. population is fully vaccinated, we could still get that percentage up higher. And as vaccine technology develops, there could be more effective and more durable vaccines in the future to increase our level of protection. After all, even if we reach herd immunity, there's still the risk of losing that level of protection. But these factors are all something to think about. Fred?
All right, Jacqueline Howard, thank you so much. And we're back in a moment.
Liverpool's quest for the quadruple could still be alive. They're playing Manchester City again today, and it is an extraordinary match at Wembley. You've got to be cool in the biggest moments in sport. Luckily, the Hawks have an ice tray. He's just helped them into the NBA playoffs. And what is up with Phil Mickelson? The golf writer Alan Shipnuck joins us to explain the controversy which made lefties step away from the tour. Hello there and welcome to World Sport. We're coming to you live from CNN Centre. I'm Don Riddell. Manchester City and Liverpool are the best two teams in England this season. They might be the best two teams in Europe and maybe even the world. And right now, they just cannot get out of each other's way. Last weekend, they played out a thrilling 2-2 draw in a top-of-the-table Premier League clash. Today, they're going at it in the semi-final of the FA Cup at Wembley. And unlike last weekend, there has to be a winner this time. Right now, it looks like it's going to be Liverpool. Ibrahima Konate's early header put the Reds in front, and then a goalkeeping howler allowed Sadio Mane to make it 2-0 after just 17 minutes. Mane then scored again to make it 3-0 by the break. City have pulled one back, but with around 15 minutes left to play, it looked like Liverpool could win. If so, they will be on track for an unprecedented quadruple of trophies this season. While those two heavyweights take a break from action in the Premier League, the focus is on the race for the top four, and there look like being another major twist. For the second time in a week, Brighton played spoiler. For the second time in a week, the Seagulls have beaten a North London team. And for the second time in a week, Leandro Trossard has personally made life miserable for teams hoping to play Champions League football next season. He scored against Arsenal in a 2-1 win last Saturday, and against their North London rivals few minutes. The Gunners have missed the chance to capitalise. They lost at Southampton, their fourth league defeat in just 5 games. It means Manchester United are now in 5th place thanks to a 3-2 win against Norwich, featuring another hat-trick from Cristiano Ronaldo. While the title races in some of Europe's top leagues have been blowouts, it could hardly be tighter in Italy, where 3 teams are within a sniff of the lead, and 2 of them are massive city rivals, AC Milan and Inter Milan. They were both in action on Friday. Inter were on. After that, Milan were in action against Genoa, knowing that 3 points would send them back to the top of the table. A good finish here from Rafael Leao, sending them on their way in the 11th minute, but they couldn't fully celebrate until 3 minutes from the end when Junior Macias smashed it into the roof of the net. So 2-0 the score here. Milan 2 points clear. It is so tight though. Both Inter and third place Napoli have games in hand. Inter have their destiny in their own hands, but so much could happen in the last 5 or 6 games. If Napoli win their outstanding game on Monday, they would only be 2 points back, and perhaps let's not count out Juventus just yet either. While Man City's men's team looks like it's on the verge of crashing out of the FA Cup, their women will be seeking a 4th FA Cup title after a comprehensive victory against West Ham today. City opened the scoring in Dagenham after a thunderous strike from Kira Walsh. Bounced off the crossbar, but only for Helen White, who guided him with a diving header. Lauren Hemp scored twice, the first of which involved some amazing ball skills before a perfect left-footed strike. 4-1 to City. They will play Chelsea or Arsenal in the final. That will be decided on Sunday. All right, we're at the business end of the NBA season. We'll be talking about that next. The Major League Baseball season is just getting started, and the actor Tom Hanks was in Cleveland to throw out the ceremonial first pitch, but he was totally upstaged by the volleyball he brought out with him to the mound, known as Wilson, his co-star from the movie Castaway. Remember that? Well, Wilson just seemed to have a mind of its own. We'll be right back. We're all set for the NBA playoffs. On Friday night, the last two teams booked their respective places in the postseason. Unfortunately, there couldn't be room for everyone, so some good teams and big names are going home. Our Koi Wire has all the action, starting with a big win for the Atlanta Hawks.
On the road in a raucous environment, Don. They lose their big man Clint Capella to injury in the first half. Down by double digits, did not matter. Atlanta kept fighting. But a sea of Cleveland faithful and the Cavs came out swinging too. Hyped up for the Eastern Conference play-in finale. The Cavs hitting 6 3-pointers in the first quarter alone, but the man who calls himself Ice Trae was savage, reminding everyone that he became just the second player ever to lead the league in scoring and assists. Check him out pulling up from the logo late in the fourth, hitting the shimmy, shimmy, give me that shake. Young dismantling Cleveland, scoring 32 of his 38 in the second half. Atlanta wins 107-101. Here's Ice Trae and his huge necklace after the game.
We just took care of business. We took care of the things we needed to. The East is probably better than the West this year, deeper as far as teams in the East, and it's a battle. I mean, the team we beat tonight definitely deserved, a playoff spot, but this year is so tough. They weren't able to make it, so it's just a testament to our team that we kept fighting and we battled and finished the job.
So it's the Hawks securing a first-round playoff date with the 1-seed Miami Heat. Game 1 is Sunday. And New Orleans Pelicans versus Los Angeles Clippers for the final playoff spot out west. Clippers without superstar Paul George, testing positive for COVID hours before the game. They're down 16 at the half, but they go on a 20-2 run in the third, Don. Reggie Jackson for 2 of his 27 points. Terrence Mann getting the crowd hype. A 10-point lead entering in the fourth, but Nola not backing down. Larry Nance on the board, tossing it to Trey Murphy for the Trey ball. Ties it up. Then, 3 minutes to go. C.J. McCollum, mic drop moment, putting the Pelicans up for good, outscoring L.A. by 14 in the final quarter. They now face the team with the best record this season, the Phoenix Suns. Game 1 on Sunday. Their star Brandon Ingram talking afterwards about the team's incredible turnaround after losing 12 of their first 13 games of the season.
As the season went on, we started believing in it more, and we got to a point at All-Star where we were saying we were going to be the hardest playing team on the floor every single night. So when we got to the last 15 games of the season, we knew how important it was, and we just continue to keep fighting.
All right, Don, the 16-team field is now officially set. The playoffs tip off Saturday with a quadruple header, with one superstar expected to return, another is not. The Mavericks likely starting their series against the Jazz without Luka Doncic because of a calf injury suffered in the final game of the regular season. But it does look like the Warriors will have their star, Steph Curry, back for their Game 1 against the Nuggets. He missed the past month with a foot injury. The 82-game regular season all comes down to this, Don. It is playoff time.
Can't wait. Koi, thanks very much. Okay, in Ukraine right now, millions of people are just trying to stay alive. A quarter of the country's population has been displaced since the Russian invasion almost 2 months ago. In North Carolina this weekend, the plight of Ukraine is in the thoughts of many as their tennis team competes against the United States in the Billie Jean King Cup. An emotional rendition of the national anthem left some of their players in tears. Those tennis players want you to know what is happening in their country. Many cities have already been destroyed, and the war seems to be taking an even more dangerous turn. Some Russian athletes are finding it harder to talk about that, though. Next on World Sport, the racing driver Nikita Mazepin tells us why he's staying neutral about all the carnage. As many countries around the world express their complete disgust at Russia's actions in Ukraine over the last 2 months, athletes and teams from Russia are finding that their options are becoming quite limited. Nikita Mazepin should have been racing for the Haas team in Formula One this year, but he was fired before the season was fully underway. His father, Dmitry, is a Belarusian and Russian oligarch, and his Uralkali firm sponsored the racing team. Now, Dmitry Mazepin wants the team to repay the $13 million he has invested, but Haas are refusing. In fact, Haas are demanding that he pay a further $8.6 million as compensation for loss of profits. On Friday, Nikita Mazepin appeared live on CNN's Quest Means Business show and explained why he wants to maintain a neutral position about the war.
My view is that, whatever is going on right now, and I can only see a very small bit from where I am in Moscow, it's very painful. And I definitely feel it. I've been living for 23 years and I was living in a very calm world. But, as to my official position, I've said many times that it's very important to be neutral for me because I'm an athlete. And I feel that it's important to be able to be neutral, and even for that, I have created a foundation that will help athletes stay neutral in principle.
Can you understand how people hear that and say, how can you be neutral when half the world is saying that there's a genocide underway at the hands of the Russian government?
I understand. And as I said, I feel that it's hugely painful, but I feel that, for who I am, and I feel myself as an athlete competing, used to be competing in Formula One. I'm not a politician to speak out on this, and I don't have enough knowledge to be making these decisions. So public neutrality is important. And I would say people should have a right to speak. And they also should have a right not to speak if they wish to do so.
But perhaps the most difficult question I'll ask you tonight, is your studied neutrality going to be the problem, the issue that will prevent you from driving again? People will say he took a position of neutrality, and that will be held against you for the foreseeable future, possibly for the rest of your career.
Well, it's a question that I feel is quite easy to answer. I think, as I said, everybody has a right to speak or not to speak, and FIA, the highest governing body, has enabled me to compete as long as I'm neutral. But I would say the biggest issue here is, coming back to the sport, where teams are allowed to be, keeping sponsorship money without fulfilling the contract, and even asking for more, even though they say they don't want money from Russia. So I'm not sure, but the sport values need to be evaluated for me after this.
Interesting. All right. The Masters at Augusta last week had a little bit of everything. Well, almost everything. You know what was missing? A touch of Phil Mickelson. After the break, we'll reflect on why he wasn't there. Hello again. The golf played at Augusta last weekend was just extraordinary, not just by the man who won the tournament, the 25-year-old Scotty Scheffler, but also the man who finished some 23 shots further back. The return of Tiger Woods was remarkable, less than 14 months after the car accident that could have cost him his life or his leg. He shot an under par round and then made the cut, which was better than many of the top athletes currently on tour. Notable by his absence from this festival of golf, though, was the three-time champion Phil Mickelson, who chose not to enter. It was a remarkable absence for a player who is currently a six-time major champion. He has been in a self-imposed exile ever since details of inflammatory comments were published in February, in which Mickelson was discussing the controversial new Saudi Golf League. He said, quote, "We know they killed Jamal Khashoggi and have a horrible record on human rights. They execute people over there for being gay. Knowing all of this, why would I even consider it? Because this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to reshape how the PGA Tour operates." Well, the backlash was immediate. Mickelson lost numerous endorsement deals and he was forced to make a lengthy and humbling apology. He said, quote, "It was reckless, I offended people and I'm deeply sorry for my choice of words. I'm beyond disappointed and will make every effort to self-reflect and learn from this." Mickelson's comments were made to the golf writer Alan Shipnuck, who will be releasing an unauthorized biography about him soon. When the story first broke, I spoke with Shipnuck to get his take on the whole affair.
Phil is a very sophisticated manipulator of the media. He's been doing it his whole career. And in my biography, I get into a lot of this stuff. And he knew exactly what he was doing. He wanted to go on record with his innermost feelings, because if he went to the Saudi Golf League, these quotes would provide some cover for him, that he does understand that they're bad actors on the world stage, but this was, strictly business. And he didn't want people to take it too personally. If he went back to the PGA Tour or stayed with the PGA Tour, it might have felt like a defeat, but he wanted to signal to golf fans that he had gotten all the concessions he wanted. So as he often does, Phil was working both sides of the street. What he didn't anticipate is Saudi Arabia is such an emotional issue for people. And I don't think he anticipated the backlash that would come his way. And, for him to say that the comments are off the record it's not accurate. And it's a little revealing of his character, because he knew what he was doing.
Have you spoken to him in the last few days?
We've had a text volley after the excerpt dropped, and he was not thrilled. But ultimately, I'm not writing this book for Phil. I mean, my allegiance is to the readers and to the truth. I mean, people have asked me, one of the questions I get most often in 30 years on the golf beat is, what is Phil really like? Because everyone knows he's kind of a slippery character, and you can never quite tell. I mean, every time Phil opens his mouth, he has an agenda, and it's hard to know who the real person is. And so that was the driving force of this book, was to let golf fans and readers really understand who Phil is. And I think this whole incident has been quite revealing. And so, I wish him well. People have said, oh, is this like a big takedown of Phil? That's not the case at all. I mean, the book is written with a certain amount of affection, and there's a lot of laugh out loud moments and all that stuff. And I'm not dancing on his grave as he takes this leave of absence from golf. I hope he comes back a better person, a better player.
I'm really intrigued by your perspective, because the fans just love him. They adore him. But is he as popular within the tour? How do the other players feel about him? We've seen Rory McIlroy the other day, saying I'm not going to kick a man when he's down, but then proceeding to do exactly that. So is he as popular with the other golfers as he is with the fans?
Rory, he was winding up like Pele, even as he was saying, I'm not going to kick him while he's down. Phil he can be very disingenuous, and he can be very slippery. And a lot of the players are tired of it. And I'm not going to violate anyone's confidence, but I've gotten a lot of text messages from players and agents and caddies who have said to the effect, I'm glad you're showing people who Phil really is. And so the fans only see kind of a certain amount of stagecraft, signing the autographs and the thumbs up and the cheesy smile. And, Phil's a great showman, and he's done a fantastic job building his brand as the consummate professional and golfing gentleman. And he's very gracious in defeat as well as victory. And all that is who Phil is. But there's another side to him that those on tour have glimpsed. And so, what this book does is just kind of peel back the curtain. And I'm not I'm not assigning any value judgments. It's up to the reader to decide what they think about Phil, but I am presenting him in a real, honest, and kind of raw way. And there's some stuff that's not so flattering. And at the same time, there's a lot to celebrate. And that's what makes Phil interesting, is he's a very complex and contradictory character.
Yeah, you can't deny his talent, though, and his achievements, and, you know, which are still going even up until very, very recently. Alan, how do you think this one episode, which comes, you know, towards the end of a long and very impressive career, how do you think this is going to impact his image and his legacy?
Phil will survive this because he's survived every other controversy that's preceded it. And honestly, he's going to come back more popular than ever from this leave of absence. You know, golf fans love a redemption story. They love a comeback. And a slightly more humble, less cartoonish Phil Mickelson is going to be immensely popular. He was already playing with fire with this Saudi seduction. And when you do that, occasionally you're going to get scorched. But I think Phil's popularity is so enduring, and he'll find other sponsors. I mean, Tiger Woods went through the tawdriest sex scandal of the internet age, and then he had a DUI, and then he had another one-car accident under questionable circumstances, and he's more beloved than ever. And he still has, you know, blue chip sponsors. So you can have a lot of second acts in American life, and I think Phil's just gearing up for another one.
Fascinating insight there from Alan Shipnuck. CNN has reached out to Mickelson's management team for a response to those comments. Mickelson has declined to comment. We still don't know when he'll be playing golf again, but Mickelson has applied to the US Open, which is at the Brookline Country Club in Boston in June. All right, just before we go, a reminder that in football, the crossbar can be a goalkeeper's best friend, but it can also be their worst enemy. Take a look at this quirky penalty, which caught our eye from the women's French First Division. A spot kick for Paris FC. Gaëtan Tini must have thought she'd missed, but it bounced down off the bar and went in off the back of the unfortunate Montpellier goalie, Lisa Schmitz. There is nothing you can do about that, except just shrug your shoulders, I guess. Paris won the game 3-1 to stay third in the table. And just before we go, an update from the FA Cup semi-final at Wembley in London, where Manchester City have lost to Liverpool 3-2. An extraordinary first-half performance from the Reds gives them that win. It means they're in the final at Wembley. They've already won the League Cup, remember, so their quest for what would be an unprecedented quadruple goes on, and they have just beaten their biggest rivals. That's it for World Sport just now. I'll see you again a bit later on. Bye-bye.
South Africa has historically been at the forefront when it comes to golf in Africa. On this month's Living Golf, we take an in-depth look at the game across the continent.
We take in the breathtaking views of Kenya's Vipingo Ridge Baobab Golf Course, where golf and nature converge like nowhere else in the world. Catch up with Trevor Immelman to look at the past, present and future of South Africa's best golfers. And sit down with Nigeria's Georgia Obo to see what it's like to be the country's first player on the Ladies European Tour. Welcome to Africa's only PGA-accredited golf course. The Baobab course at Vipingo Ridge in Kenya.
I think the interesting about this golf course is that everyone who plays it, they all say there's no hole that you sort of forget. They're all different and they're all memorable. It's a good challenge, it's a good test, but it's not too difficult. It's fun.
Alongside top-tier facilities, golfers here join some unusual company.
It's such a nice thing to be able to go play golf and you've got wildlife just around you. You know, it's not false, it's not a zoo, it's just, that's where they want to be.
This wildlife may seem to be at home, but it wasn't always this way. Originally a sisal plantation until 2004, it's since been transformed into a mixed-use development composed of residential and commercial properties, along with the course and wildlife sanctuary. Most of the animals living here are rescues, and in order to host these animals, the course had to prove it had the space, capacity and food for the wildlife.
The Kenyan government encourages more space for wildlife, and we encourage anybody who has large portions of lands to convert them into sanctuaries or conservancies. And one of them is Vipingo development here. The estate is 2,500 acres. They have allocated some 800 acres as a sanctuary and to have wildlife.
It's been a prolonged dry season this year, and the course has prioritised minimal greens watering to preserve water. And with the absence of predators, most animals are free to roam, munching on indigenous trees planted for their taste.
We try as much as possible not to control the movement of these animals and let them move on their own. We have a lot of bushes, let them go into the bush. We just allow them to be rewilded so that human interaction and that being close to human is a bit wears off a bit.
The animals aren't the only ones making themselves at home. At its PGA Academy, Vipingo Ridge brings top-of-the-line equipment to the next generation, training some of Kenya's top ladies youth players on site.
Technology in golf in the last 15 years has been dramatic. You know, the influence of technology, if you like. Understanding ground pressure, understanding kinematic sequence, understanding how to generate the most speed, which means you can hit the ball further, is in today's game, it's key.
Looking to the future, this team sees opportunity to expand golf's reach.
Well, I think golf is growing in the region, and I think there's a general consensus that we need to involve more, a broader range of players. So starting with kids, for example, and the more people you embrace to come and try out, the more chance you've got of finding a champion, that's for sure.
As Kenya works to cement its place in the world of elite golf, Vipingo Ridge is looking to combine its future with conservation.
We have just introduced animals in Vipingo Sanctuary here, but slowly It can be a rescue center for also endangered species. For example, the gravy zebras are important because they're endangered in Kenya. They are few in numbers. So we want to encourage not only animals that are found in Kenya, but even animals that are being brought into Kenya which are currently endangered in our list.
Our intention is to create ultimately a breeding program where we can breed up stocks and improve gene pools with a view to then, in conjunction with KWS, reintroducing them either to the wild, into the parks, or to other sanctuaries and conservation areas like ourselves.
And moving forward, it's not just golf courses that can bring conservation to the fore.
Obviously, with the way the population is
When thinking of golf development worldwide, the continent of Africa comes to mind as an untapped opportunity. And that's not just because of the sheer volume of land mass or population, but because of the heritage and legends like Bobby Locke and Gary Player. And among them, Trevor Immelman is constantly inspiring the next generation of South African golfers. The pride within South Africa and South African golf with its rich history, is that something that gives you an enormous sense of satisfaction that, you know, you were able to match some of your predecessors?
Absolutely. For me to be able to follow in those guys' footsteps, the Bobby Locks, the Gary Players, the Ernie Els, Retief Goosen,